The Amanda Project by Melissa Kantor and Amanda Valentino. Chapter 18. Is it possible for time to move backward? Backward. Absolutely backward. For a while it seemed to me the clock in the front of the room wasn't moving at all, but then when I looked up, it was definitely 2 minutes earlier than it had been when I'd last checked. Meanwhile, what could Nia possibly be doing? What was she going to say to Thornhill about being gone for so long? Even though I wasn't the one who was about to have to explain my absence to him, my heart was alternating pounding and stopping. If this went on for much longer, I was going to need one of those machine doctors that zap a person's chest with 10,000 volts of electricity to bring him back to life. For a long time, I was sure Hal was blissfully unaware of Nia's absence, as I was conscious of it. While I switched around in my chair, glancing at the book in front of me before looking up to check the time again, he stayed focused on his sketchbook, calmly drawing in the library. How could he just sit there like that? How could he be so mellow? But then Mr. Thornhill stood up, and I saw Hal's hand go to his pocket. As the vice principal made his way toward the door of the library, Hal's hand closed around his cell phone. My heart was beating so hard I was sure everyone in the room could hear it. I could tell Hal was dialing a number, but then Mr. Thornhill took a stapler from the librarian's desk and headed back to sit down. Hal slid his hand from his pocket, and I couldn't tell if he'd hit send or not. Less than a minute later, the door flew open, and Nia, breathless and red in the face, came in. If you'd have told me 3 days ago I'd be this happy to see Nia Rivera, I'd have laughed in your face. That was longer than I would have liked a bathroom break to be, Nia, said Mr. Thornhill, not looking up from his project. Sorry, said Nia. All the girls' bathrooms in this wing are locked. I had to go to the one by the theater. Was she lying? If so, it was a bold lie. How easy would it be for Mr. Thornhill to check? But before I could decide whether he was likely to do that, Jason raised his hand. Mr. Thornhill, I gotta go to the bathroom too. Mr. Thornhill didn't look up. I'm sure you can wait, Jason. No, seriously, Mr. Thornhill, I got this problem with my bladder, and it means that if I don't go to the bathroom at least once an hour, Be so kind as to spare us the details of your physiological disorders, Jason, said Mr. Thornhill. Please come up here. In spite of myself, I was kind of curious about what Jason was going to tell Mr. Thornhill. Were there really disorders where you had to go to the bathroom every hour? I heard Jason say the word doctor and Mr. Thornhill say highly doubt, when suddenly Nia's hip bumped against my table. In the middle of the wild swans was a familiar key in a tiny piece of folded up paper. Key works. Get file. I looked up, and Nia was already sitting at her table. Only the fact that she was breathing a little rapidly made it possible for me to believe this was all happening. Had she really broken into Thornhill's office? Had she been able to get the footage? For a second I wondered why she hadn't just grabbed Amanda's file while she was in there. But then Mr. Thornhill said something to Jason, and as Jason left the library, I realized it was time for me to focus on how I was going to get out of there, too. Jason took almost as long as the bathroom as Nia had, and I couldn't help imagining that he, too, had broken into Thornhill's office. But it seemed unlikely that everyone serving detention had the same agenda. Mr. Thornhill didn't ask Jason why it had taken him so long, so I figured he'd probably believe Nia's story about the bathrooms being locked. The clock ticked. I was sure I could feel Nia staring at me, but whenever I looked over at her, she was buried in her book. Now, I said to myself, do it now. But I just continued to sit there. Then suddenly my hand was in the air like it shot up by itself. My heart was racing so hard I felt dizzy, and the deep breath I took did nothing to calm me down. 5 minutes, Callie, said Mr. Thornhill. He did not look up from what he was reading. Mr. Thornhill, may I? He raised his head. I said you have 5 minutes. Don't make me come looking for you. Was it paranoia, or did he utter those words as if he were coming to look for me, and he would know exactly where to find me? I swung my bag off the table and headed toward the door from the library. The vice principal's office was as far from the library as it was possible to be without actually leaving the school. No sooner had the door shut behind me than I started running, glad I thought to wear my sneakers instead of my boots, which would have clattered down the hall like a dozen horses. But even though I was really sprinting, it felt like it took at least 5 minutes to get to the main office. My hand was shaking so much I could barely work the key. It slipped around in my fingers and wouldn't go into the hole for so long I thought Nia must have had the wrong key to me. But just as I was about to confirm that this one said do not duplicate, I felt the smooth slipping of metal on metal, and the key was in the lock, and the door was opening. It was really weird to be in the main office all by myself. None of the hustle and bustle of secretaries or phones or students filing in and out. I heard a noise that started and then realized it was just my own breathing. The sound was harsh and foreign. Get a hold of yourself, Callie. We've got one chance to do this right. Mr. Thornhill's door squeaked slightly. Then it was open, and I was standing alone in his office. I went over to the filing cabinets along the wall. My hands were still shaking, and I was having trouble remembering the alphabet. Was Valentino after Valence or Valentine? I literally had to stand there humming the alphabet song, trying not to think about how it would look if I was apprehended, with the ABCs on my lips. They weren't going to send me to jail, they were going to send me to kindergarten. Valentine, Jane P., Malat, Richard Van Velez, Thomas J. Wait a minute. I went back to the first V folder and started making my way through them, more slowly this time, but when I got to Richard Valat, there was no way around it. Amanda's file wasn't here. Damn! Where was it? I spun around. Mr. Thornhill's desk was as cluttered as free as it had been Thursday morning. Even the folders that had been there had been put away, so there was nothing to disrupt this pristine green of the plotter that sat on the gray surface of his desk. His desk! I went over to his desk and stood there, hesitant to open it. Was I really going to go through the vice principal's desk? Callie, you're standing in his office, which you just broke into using a stolen key. You don't really think things are going to go worse for you if you found out he went through his drawers, do you? Suddenly it occurred to me that maybe Thornhill would have bought Amanda's letter. The purple envelope I'd seen, or not seen, in his car was in fact a letter from Amanda. Into his office with him this morning. I could picture him discovering it as he was getting out of the car, slipping it from between the newspapers and reading it on his way into the building. Then he would have put it... I looked at the blank surface of the desk again. Where? Slowly, carefully, as if not getting caught were all about being as silent as possible, I slid open the top middle drawer of Mr. Thornhill's desk. Amanda's file wasn't there, but pretty much everything else in the universe was. As messy as the interior of his car had looked through the window, it had nothing on his desk drawer. There were thousands of pens and pencils, many just stubs, old crumpled post-its, erasers, stamps, paper clips. Toward the back, shoved under some detritus, was what looked like one of the manila folders from the drawer. Amanda's! It had to be Amanda's! Sweaty palmed, I reached back and slid it out, but there was no name on the tab and there was nothing inside. I tried sliding the folder back into place, but it kept getting stuck on something. Now I was completely freaking out, shoved as hard as I could, but whatever the folder was catching on wouldn't budge. I slid my hand into the back of the drawer and slid what turned to be a plain white envelope toward me. Who would have guessed a little envelope would cause so much trouble? That was out of the way. The folder slid back easily, but my hands were shaking so much that as I went to put the envelope back into the folder, I dropped it. I grabbed for it too hard, wrinkling the thin paper. Would he notice? I slid it toward me, flipped it over, planning on smoothing it out. There, in the top left corner, was the familiar spinning red galaxy, and scrawled across the front of the envelope was one word, Roger, written in my mother's handwriting. For a second, I was sure I was wrong. I had to be. Maybe it just looked like my mother's handwriting. Because why would there possibly be an envelope from my mother in Mr. Thornhill's desk drawer? I was sure I was going to be sick. And when my phone buzzed, I didn't recognize the sound at first. Without even looking at my cell, still staring at those 5 letters my mother had definitely written, I hit the center button and glanced at the screen of my phone. Get out of the office now.